Hello and welcome to SIB Sermons Part 3, right? 3?
I think 3.
So just a quick reminder of who we are. For those of you who might be tuning in for the first time, we do invite you to go back and watch the first 2, which were profound and will change your life. But if you are familiar with us already, I am Wendy Fambrough from Emmanuel Baptist Church. I'm the middle child.
I'm the youngest child. I am Sandy Hasenauer. I'm Executive Minister of American Baptist Churches of Rochester, Genesee region. And
I'm actually over here.
You're down there.
You're down there.
You're down there.
I'm up here. Anyway, I am Lori DeMott. I'm the oldest of the girls, and I am with the Union University Church in Alfred, New York.
Awesome. So we've been sort of taking turns to figure out what we wanted to talk about on these little chats. It was my turn. I have thought about it. And here's where I landed. So one of the lectionary readings at some point, we sort of decide whether or not we want to follow that, but I looked at it and it had something to do with Paul's conversion experience on the road to Damascus. I was remembering a time that Lori and I were in New York City, sitting around Rockefeller Center, I think. We were very young. And this also quite young woman came up and asked us, were we saved? And Lori and I, being Lori and I, kind of went on a theological rant, which then...
It wasn't a rant. It was a very clear and discerning biblical exegesis.
Whatever it was, the effect on this young woman was it sent her away in tears because, it was not what she had anticipated.
She couldn't respond to any of our
She could not hold her own in the discussion.
No.
But what she really was lacking from us was, a clear date, time, event that showed where our faith began. And that just wasn't really the tradition we'd been raised in. However, I do suspect that each of us has moments in our lives that have had an impact on our faith. I get so sick of faith journey, but on our faith life together. And I am curious to hear about that from you guys, because we don't really talk about that all that much. And particularly today, I was thinking about if you've had experiences along the way or learnings or encounters or whatever that might be informing how you're managing this whole pandemic piece and your ministry. Simple, right?
So you start.
Oh, okay. Well, we didn't really set the rules. Okay, so.
I'm setting them. I'm the oldest.
Yeah,
She's the oldest. She's all about the rules. I'm the one about breaking them. You're the one about trying to keep the balance.
I am keeping the peace. I'm so stupid. Okay, anyway. So, weirdly, the thought that immediately comes to my mind, well, there's 2. One was the reason I kind of wanted to talk about it with my siblings is because we grew up just immersed in a faith community. It was just part of the air we breathed. It was never really, it wasn't a shift for us to then become people of faith. We just were born into it. I do recall, though, there was a time when I was a teenager and questioning, as every good teenager should, and looking around at the people that we had grown up with in a church and thinking, they don't seem crazy to me. So I was willing to give them the benefit of the doubt until I figured things out. But there was one time that I took a walk with our father, Dad, through the woods at Watson Homestead. And I said, Dad, let's talk about prayer. What does that mean to you? And I was like, we don't usually have those kind of direct conversations. And it was so lovely. It was really wonderful. And in that walk with Dad, I was expressing this experience I had had, which is one that I don't really enjoy sharing because it makes me sound like one of those sort of hooby-dooby Mother Earth people that people look at weirdly. And it's something that stuck with me because it was so unexpected. This isn't a way I envision my own faith, but there was a time when I was trying to do more meditation, not so good at that. I'm really good at Tai Chi, which is a lovely meditation art, but not so good at just sitting. But I was having these experiences where I was having an encounter with a woman who appeared to be like a grandmother. She had gray hair braided around her. She was, I'm just a little embarrassed to say this, but she actually was in a teepee setting. I know this is so Mother Earth. But anyway, I had had a couple of encounters with her where it had been silence. It was just the two of us sitting, and there would be an experience around that. But there came a time that I was serving a church in Ithaca. We were on a women's retreat, and the war in Iraq had just begun, Desert Storm. And we were actively bombing over there. And our women were having this retreat in this beautiful little spot. And our retreat leader was somebody from the outside, and she was like trying to get us to be religious and do religious craft projects and things. And then she had us sit and do a meditation exercise. And I was feeling so internally rebellious about the whole thing. So there I am as the minister having this internal dialogue that was just like, no, I am not going to meditate. No, I don't want to pray right now. No, and you know how we get.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So, and the reason was I was feeling extreme guilt over being this white American woman in the comfort of this beautiful retreat center, having the ability to pray for stuff while I knew that there were women in Iraq who were, fighting for their lives. And it was kind of our fault in some ways. So I was feeling all this guilt and having this internal argument when all of a sudden there was this woman, this grandmother, a grandmother who, by the way, Dad had met in his own meditations. Anyway, she was there. I walked away from her. I turned my back on her because I was like, I'm so sorry. So sorry. Didn't mean to be here, feeling guilty. And then all of a sudden, behind me, I felt hands on my shoulders, and I knew she was standing behind me. And as soon as she put her hands on my shoulders, I felt this energy just really go out and go forth, presumably toward Iraq. And it was this sense that, oh no, this is a power that you have. This is something that we're being asked to share. I feel that same way in this pandemic when we can't be right next to each other. We can't fix the pandemic, but we do have this strength of prayer. And I think of it in terms of sort of a quantum physics where we're just really shifting realities by sending that energy out. So that's my experience. So who wants to go next?
Sandy?
Oh, Sandy, you're muted.
Sandy.
You're muted.
Sorry.
There she
I
is.
have this nice pathway going behind me. Can I just point to that and say, okay, Lori's turn?
Although I do understand that, yes.
Yeah, it is an interesting thing having grown up in the family that we did. I remember when I was in my teenage years. By the way, I'm very jealous of the fact that you and Dad shared the same dream grandmother. Yes.
Yeah, weird.
Um,
Oh, I will tell you a little part of that story, though. When I was describing it, he said, oh, you've met the grandmother. And I said, yes, have you? And he said, yes, but she's never asked me to sit down. So, points to me. Okay.
yes, and as the little sister, I also have a bit of FOMO, fear of missing out, on the fact that you two were in New York City together. I wasn't invited.
You were little.
Just saying.
Yeah, you must have been really little.
I must have been.
Not really little. I mean, I was in.
Well, if it's the same trip I'm remembering, I was only like 5 or 6. Maybe.
Yeah, probably.
Because I remember being really scared of the subways.
No, because I would have been in seminary, I think.
You were at least.
Kathy Hall was there.
Yeah.
This is irrelevant to
all
those who are listening, but anyway.
So I was the little sister being left out. Let's just say that.
Okay. All right, fine.
No, but anyway, when I was coming up through, junior high school, the big thing at that, I'm sorry, my office door just came crashing open and I now have a dog in here.
Thought maybe it was the grandmother.
No, well, that would have been kind of cool.
It would have been.
It's just my golden retriever, although he is my spirit animal, so we can say that. But when I was in junior high and high school, the big thing was these various music groups, you know, Christian rock groups that would go around, and they would do this big altar call in the middle of it. And I remember every one of those events, they always talked about the conversion experience, you know, when their lives turned around and they went from being these horrible people to being these people that had devoted their lives to God. And I remember sitting there going, I don't know what that feels like, because, you know, like you said, we had just kind of grown up in the church, and not just going to church. It was very much a part of our whole family ethos. And it was a very natural part of our family ethos. It's not like we, you know, we didn't sit around reading from the Bible every morning or anything. It was just part of conversation on occasion. And, you know, we all
Although
knew.
Dad did have us memorize Bible verses at
Around the
dinners,
dinner table.
around the day, but you may have been too young for
I
that
was
too.
too young for that. He
Wow,
gave up on that by the
FOMO.
time I came around.
Yeah, no, I can still do a lot of them.
Yeah, we memorized in 4th grade, which was the last year I had them as my Sunday school teacher. But, you know, Dad always talked about going to Cranberry Island every summer and getting his directions from God. You know, so it was part of what we grew up doing. So there was never a sense of a time at which I made a specific decision. If anything, it was just kind of ongoing little decisions. So when it comes to, you know, those moments of kind of discovery, there haven't been like the big earth-shattering ones. There have been the little affirmations, I guess, along the way. Times when things happen that when I looked back on them, I'm kind of like, oh, well, that was weird, but okay. You know, that must have been kind of things at work. So in terms of this experience, I think where I'm seeing my faith come in is that I am constantly reaffirmed by what I'm seeing in the people around me. I don't know if you guys know this, but we DeMotts can tend to be cynical. Have you noticed that?
I like to think of it as wry.
We are witty and right, yes, but we can have our moments of cynicism. And there's an awful lot that it's possible to be cynical about right now, but I find myself really resisting going there, and I'm finding myself almost annoyed at the people who seem to live there, because I feel like, are you not seeing all the good that's happening? Are you not seeing all the people that are totally committing themselves to helping people in whatever way they can? Are you not seeing the people who are really trying to make this work? And, you know, like we were talking before we started recording, with all of you who are pastors who are now doing church in very different ways, what may have felt like a loss at the very beginning is now showing you all the many possibilities that have been a part of this, and the growth and the beauty that's been a part of this. And at some level trying to figure out, how do we keep those elements as things do eventually get less restricted and we're able to go out. So when we, you know, you talk about Paul's conversion experience, that's something I've heard a lot about. I have never personally experienced. So it's difficult for me to make a relationship from that to my current experience, but the constant little conversions, the constant little reaffirmations, those are definitely there. You know, every time I'm on a conference call, every time I'm reading things that pastors have written, and when I'm reading things that people are really honestly struggling with, how are they viewing this through the theological lens or through the lens of faith? Those are those kind of constant reaffirmations for me that, yes, God is at work within this, and the more open we are to seeing God at work within us, the more God can be also at work within us at the same time. So I'm hoping that the grandmother appears to me, but that hasn't been my experience yet. So
Yeah, I'm still over here. Okay, I think it's very interesting, Wendy, that you talked about that because, in my family, everybody always says I'm like Dad. But one of the places where I've been very clearly aware that I'm not like Dad is that I don't have the mystical outlook that Dad did, and I think you have it. I've always thought, Wendy and Dad have much more of a similar, not theological outlook, but just kind of experiential outlook. I'm more like Mom, I think, in kind of a practical thing. But if, to jump ahead, bypassing right now my own personal experience and just getting to the COVID-19, I'll come back to mine. But I think one of the things that I have been very aware of in this is how different people relate to God and relate to the church, and trying throughout this whole thing to try to make sure that all of those different personalities and the different needs are being met, which means sometimes having to be very creative. But, I think some of my awareness of those different kinds of experiences is from over the years, having seen and heard dads, knowing what you've talked about, Wendy. I didn't know about the grandma, but, you've talked about other experiences that are more mystically, I call mystically based, emotionally based, or psychological, I don't know, something like that, than mine, which I tend to be a very pragmatic person. And so my own personal experience, I always say to people, I see God more in hindsight than I do in the moment. And that I very much relate to all of the biblical characters who were reluctantly called, because my whole ministry has been reluctant. And I don't think that I'm surprising anybody in my church by saying that. I think most people know that, I didn't want to go into ministry. I wanted to go into biblical teaching. And the reason I
Marine
stayed,
biology, as I recall.
no, that was first animal behavior, whales. No, but in seminary, I went to seminary because I liked the Bible, and I loved biblical teaching, biblical research, and then I wanted to go into biblical teaching. But I stayed in ministry partly because, I think I have some skills that are helpful to ministry. And so it was just always kind of like, in fact, my ordination passage that I chose for my ordination was, I did not choose you, you chose me. Whatever that is from John. That was a terrible quote. But, that passage from John, because that's really what I felt all along, is that every time I thought, that I just don't know if I really can be doing this anymore, there was a sense that you have the skills that are needed in this situation. And that's really been very clear to me with Zoom Church. I love tech. I love doing all of this stuff. And thank goodness, because, we've been immersed in it. And I know that there are an awful lot of ministers who are just tearing their hair out. And I really kind of like it. I like doing all this stuff. But, going back to the Paul on the road to Damascus kind of experience, I think that we as ministers need to be very aware of the diversity of personalities and the diversity of ways that God speaks to people, and not say there's just this one way and everybody has to fit into that box. And in a way, the whole going virtual has been good because it's broken us out of all of the boxes that we were in. And as we're trying to kind of figure out how to go forward, it gives us the opportunity to think about all of those different kinds of experiences and how can we bring everybody in the church into that. And I also think, like Sandy, you said, affirming the importance of the community this has really brought that to mind for me. This whole, what's it been, 7 weeks? It's been 7 weeks. But
yeah.
Watching my congregation just really stepping forward and checking on one another and sharing their experiences and what's important to them and Bible verses that have been important to them. For me, the church has been more alive in the last 7 weeks because of the congregation, because of the community and the way they've come together. Sandy, you may be muted again.
Probably am, because I'm drinking and I didn't want you to all hear the slurping.
Okay. What are you drinking?
Just sparkling pomegranate water. I think one of the other things that we're thinking about is, as you mentioned, the biblical characters, is how none of them really felt prepared or worthy of what they were being asked to do. And yet it was clear that it was kind of their histories, their life stories, their experiences that did bring them to those places. And, I think about one of the things I wanted to do as executive minister is, and I came to this understanding a few years back, I realized I was a connector. I was somebody that was very good at meeting people and putting them together with other people and trying to get them to meet around a variety of things. And so when I came into this position, I thought, I think God is asking me to be a connector, and I often refer to myself as connective tissue in the region, is that I'm just here to kind of keep people talking to each other. Little did I know that with COVID coming along, that would actually be the primary thing that I'm doing is connecting people and trying to help people stay connected. And I'm trying to do that with people who are also trying to do that, so it's this kind of web and layers, and understanding that, I guess if I had to say, I have not necessarily felt like God was turning me, but God has definitely been continually surprising me. Every step of the way, every position I've ever had in ministry, every volunteer thing I've ever had in ministry, none of them did I ever see coming. It was always kind of the surprise that they came, and being open to what I was seeing. So I feel like I'm like rambling and going off tangent, but I have been wondering, in that position of openness, what is it that might be opening to us now that we wouldn't have seen if we were all still in our churches and things were just kind of trucking along as they've always been trucking?
Well, and for sure, this really kind of came at us very suddenly.
Yeah, we didn't have a lot of
So
time.
we've already regrouped into a phase where we're sort of assuming we kind of see where things are leading next, and who knows? I mean, we didn't know this was happening 6 weeks ago. Who knows 6 weeks from now what crazy new thing is going to be demanded of us? So actually for me, with, you mentioned this mystical piece, which for sure I spent time studying the mystics back in seminary. But one of the things I notice in the biblical tales, including really Saul to Paul, is that, they make a big deal about these moments, but really if you look at like Abraham, he talks to God in person maybe, 3 times over the course of 159 years or whatever he lived. I don't remember his years. But so, I don't walk around in a mystical state having conversations with God all the time. But what it does change in me is that, so now we're in COVID era. And I just kind of hang on to those moments, that those moments aren't any less real. So it's good to just be able to have them and carry them with me into whatever the new thing is.
Am I going to interrupt here for a second? When you describe those moments, for me, those moments happen when I'm reading the biblical stories. They're not, I wouldn't actually think of them as mystical moments, but there's a Jewish story or something or a quote where one of the rabbis says, when you study Torah, it's like the flames of the Spirit appear over your head. And that for me is, when I read those stories in the Bible, they're not just stories. I'm living those stories and I'm in those stories. And that's when I feel that spirit. I wouldn't describe it quite in the same way, but it's that intensity. And so those are what I come back to, when I'm feeling down or feeling like, just the reluctant minister or whatever, I come back to the story, and for me that burns. That's the moment that I can carry, goes on with me. So it's interesting, because as you're describing that, I'm thinking to myself, that's exactly what I feel when I read those stories.
Well, and I often will just think, to me, what does the Bible mean? Well, the Bible means God was here in Genesis, God was here, God was here, God was here, God was here. So when we close the Bible, we can assume that God is carrying
Still,
on.
yep.
We'll still be here. So it's like, well, God's in this. I suspect we have really harder times yet to come that when this country might just turn really ugly. I don't know. I mean, it already has a lot of ugly qualities. So I'm concerned about what is to come. But I do think that the church often thrives in those moments of adversity. That's when they really have to lean into their faith and it becomes more real. And as soon as that happens, then I think we've actually got something to offer.
And I think also going back to the conversion of Paul and that whole conversion experience, Paul didn't convert in terms of his personality. The only conversion was purpose. That he went from persecuting the Christians to, working on behalf of the Christians. So his focus, his purpose, his meaning changed, but he was still the same, difficult personality that it was before.
I was curious what word you would choose, but
I was being careful.
We'll go with difficult.
I was being careful. But, so for all of us, when we think of conversion, our conversions aren't necessarily of a personality. They're just a conversion of what does your life now, what's the focus of your life going to be? And certainly in COVID-19, we should all be having a huge conversion in recognizing that this is where the rubber meets the road. This is where our faith really does make a difference.
Amen, sister.
Yeah, you're supposed to be pounding your steering wheel at the
If I stop and pound my laptop, it'd be bouncing all over. But yeah, so I think for COVID-19, it's as you said, Wendy, during this moment, this is actually where our faith matters in a real way, not just to ourselves, but to the rest of the world. And in a way that's exciting. You hate to say all these people are sick and dying. Hey, our church is thriving. I don't want to say that, but there is that thing. Churches really, if they take it seriously, and if Christians take their faith seriously, they can really thrive in this time because they have something to offer the world.
Yeah.
We. I'm one of those too.
Yeah, Lori's got something to offer. Call her. Okay, well, I think we've answered the question. What do you think?
Since I don't even entirely remember what the question was, we started. Yes.
That pomegranate juice.
The pomegranate. Yes.
And I'm going to go home and wait for the grandmother.
Yes.
Yeah, she's pretty quiet. You'll like her.
Okay.
All right. Well, thanks, ladies.
Thank you, everybody.
It's been lovely.
Bye.
See you again.
Yep.